Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today an offshore oil rig has blown and the rupture is spilling crude oil into the ocean at an alarming rate. You're on a response team that will be using your individual talents to avert an ecological disaster to contain the oil and save the sea life. The Spill is a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players. It takes 50 minutes to play, is for ages 14 and up, and published by Smirk and Dagger Games. Now today, I'm going to be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video, just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Now this game is on Kickstarter right now, and that campaign page link is below me as well. Without further ado, let's get started. The Spill is a cooperative game where oil is going to be spilling out onto the board and into the water. And this oil can contaminate animals, so you're going to need to either be pushing back oil or rescuing these contaminated animals in order to save them. Because if too many animals go into the sick bay, you'll end up losing the game. But each of you will be one of these specialists with a great ability. And you'll be moving your ship around in different sectors and possibly rescuing animals. If you rescue enough animals or remove enough oil dice, you'll be able to unlock all different resource cards, which gives you cool abilities like calling in a specialist that wasn't in this game. Saving animals and removing dice from the game make up your win conditions that are needed in order to win the game. But it's not always easy because some dice come out and affect the weather that make it harder to get your things done. When a column's full, spillouts affect that column, going into the next column, possibly affecting other animals as well. And also, if you have too many spillouts, it's another possible way to lose the game. So let's see if you and your specialist friends can do enough to contain the oil and save the sea life. First, we're going to show you how to set up the oil rig dice tower. Now keep in mind that even though this is a rule school, this is a prototype and the final components might look slightly different, but this should still help you get everything set up. First, you're going to find the 2 pieces of cardboard that have X in the middle of them. Once you have those 2, have the one that has the 4 on the right side and 2 on the right side, and have it like this, the 2 on the top and the 4. You're simply going to stand this one up, and then you're going to stand this one up and flip it so it goes just like this. That way you have the 4 here and the 2 is right here. So right now it should look something like this. We have the 3 here and the 4 here, and this is the 2 right here. You're going to grab the piece that has the 3 in the middle. You want the C towards you here and the D up here. The other piece has the 4 in the middle with B here and A up here. You're simply now going to take this 3 and just stand it up and put it on just like this, and you'll do the same for this 4. It goes right here on that 4. Now we're still looking at it the same way, but now I've added 2 more pieces laying down. This one has a 1 in the middle, and this one has a 2 in the middle. Now this 2 has the B on our right and the C on our left. This one has D on our left and A on our right. Just gonna stand it up and place it right here, because this 1 is actually going into this one right here. And then simply we're going to stand up this one just like this, and the 2 is going right into the middle too, just like that. So you should have 4 boxes just like that. Off to the side, we have 2 funnels. I have one way and one flipped up in the other direction. We have 4 long legs and 4 short legs. For the one that's sort of upside down like this, with the funnel facing up towards us, we're going to take these short legs and we're going to place them firmly but gently in all 4 of these holes just like this. Then we're going to flip this up and put these 4 legs right into the holes of this one. So at this point, it should look just like this. Next, we're going to put the base just next to it like this. And we're going to use these 4 long legs, and we're going to place those legs right into these holes. And then we're going to place this on top of the long legs. So now it should look just like this. Next, you're going to place the board in the middle of the table. Then you're going to place the cardboard structure that you just made right in the middle like this. It's going to be in sort of a diamond shape like that. And this is to ensure that each quadrant goes from die 1 to die 6 in each of the 4 quadrants. Then you'll slide the tower on right onto that base, and it should be pretty much straight, just like that. Again, these are prototype components. This is actually going to be a molded piece and it's going to be colored in the final version. Check the Kickstarter link to see what that will look like. Next, you're going to place all the marine animals. You'll see them drawn in on different spots of the board and you're going to place the tiles right on there. Now you'll want to make sure to put them on the healthy side that looks like this. They should not be on the contaminated side that has oil on it. They all should be healthy and look something like this. Next, you're going to find the team specialist cards. You are going to use 4 of these regardless of the amount of players in the game. If you're playing solo, you'll use all 4 of them. If you're playing 2 players, each player will have 2 of these. If you're playing 3 players, each player controls 1, and the 4th is a communal specialist that everybody will work together to use its abilities. If you're playing 4 players, each player has 1 of them. You're now going to place the specialist, or specialists if you're controlling more than 1 of them depending on player count, in front of you face up like this. You're going to find the corresponding ship color and place it next to you, along with 2 orange cubes. For the ones that aren't being used by the players, you'll place them face up with their ship off to the side of the board. These might come into play later. Now each player is going to be sitting at a different side of the board. Each of those boards is known as quadrants, and each quadrant has 6 sectors, numbered 1 through 6 with these dice. So when you're at your quadrant, you will simply roll the die. We have 1, so we will place our ship right in sector 1 of that quadrant because this is the side that we're sitting on. All players will follow suit and do the same thing on their quadrant of the board. Next, you're going to place this situation board to one side of the game board. You're going to place the spillout token, which is on the black part of this spillouts. Now, we recommend, if it's your first game, to play standard, so you'll place it just like this. You're also going to place 3 orange cubes over here. These are sort of win conditions that you will be tracking. Next, you're going to find the deck of resource cards. You're going to shuffle them up and you're going to deal 2 face down to each specialist. Then that specialist is going to look at the cards and choose 1 to keep and 1 to discard out of the game. In a 3-player game, you discuss the communal specialist cards as a team. All 4 cards that were selected go under the resources 1 through 4 at the bottom of that board. Next, you're going to separate out 8 black dice off to the side. Keep in mind that the dice that you use to roll in order to place your ship at the beginning of the game, those are still in play, so you could take some of those and make up some of the 8 of those. So we have 8 here. You're also going to take all the rest of the black dice and the 4 blue weather dice. You're going to take all these and you're going to place them in this bag. Then you're going to shake the bag up. Next, you're going to take the 8 dice that you set aside, not the ones you put in the bag, but the ones that were set aside, and you're going to drop them right into the dice tower. Now, then we're going to take the dice in that quadrant and place it into its corresponding sector. Like this one's a 5 and it goes here and it's always going in the closest ring to the dice tower. This is a 6, so it would go here. If this one happened to have been a 6, it would then continue down to the next one just like that. Now, if the third one was a 6, anytime during this beginning setup, a die is on where a marine animal is, you would take this die and throw it back in the dice tower and reset that where it belongs. Much like if there were 2 5s, you can't start the game with a die where an animal is, so this would get re-rolled and thrown back into the dice tower and placed in the corresponding quadrant and sector. The object of the game is to work together cooperatively to win. You can win by fulfilling all 3 of these win conditions that we'll go over in detail later. Save 3 contaminated marine animals, remove a total of 12 oil dice from the game, and save 2 full sets of marine life. This will make more sense as we go through the game. I'll show you as they come up how these fulfill. Now, in addition to those win conditions, you also have to make sure there's no losing conditions on the board at the same time, which we'll go over in just a moment. The other way to win is if this bag of oil dice runs out and there's no losing conditions on the board, that's another way to win. That's sort of winning by the end of the game from a sort of timing or clock perspective. However, there are 3 ways to lose the game. There's 2 sick bays, 1 at each corner of the board, and each of these depict 3 of the different marine animals, so between both sick bays, they have all 6 of them. Over the course of the game, some of them animals are going to get contaminated with oil, and if you don't rescue them, they'll end up in the sick bay. One way to lose is to have at least 1 of all 6 animal types, marine animal types, in the sick bay. Here's 3 of them, and if there's 3 in the other sick bay, then that's all 6, and you'll lose that way. Another way to lose is to have a sick bay holding 3 contaminated marine animals of the same type, like this, for example. The last possible way to lose is by spillouts. A single spillout is having 3 dice in the same numbered sector, like this. If you have 6 or more spillouts, then that's one way to lose the game. The game is played in clockwise order over multiple turns, and each turn a specialist will go through different phases. They'll go through the spill phase, the action phase cleanup, and win-lose conditions check. Now the spill phase we're going to go over later because we already have set the game up, and on the first turn of the game you don't do the spill phase, so we're going to skip it here. Also because some of the mechanisms that happen at that spot you haven't really learned yet. So first you do the spill phase, first turn of the game you skip it because the board is set up. So let's jump right to the action phase. In the action phase, that active specialist has 4 action points to spend on their turn to perform different actions, and these are all labeled at the bottom of your player aid or your specialist card there, and it tells you how many action points it takes to do any of these. Now you'll be able to take these actions in a combination of any of these as long as you haven't overspent your 4 action points, and you can spend action points to take the same action more than once. So I'm now going to go over all the different actions that you can take. You can spend 1 action point to rescue a healthy marine animal. It needs to be in the same sector where you're at. So in this case, we could rescue either of these. They're both healthy. Remember, healthy looks like that. Contaminated looks like that. So we could spend 1 action point to rescue one of these. We could actually spend another action point to rescue the other one if we wanted to. But in this case, let's just rescue this one. When you rescue it, you're going to place it on the situation board, always at the top empty spot for that marine animal. We're going to talk about this later, but you're trying to fulfill a complete row of rescued animals. We'll tell you why in just a little bit. You can spend 1 action to move up to 2 sectors away, either clockwise or counterclockwise. So we could go up to 2, 1, 2, and now we're there. That would have cost just 1 action point. And when moving, it's okay to move into a completely different quadrant for one that you're not sitting right next to. You can spend 1 action point to push back an oil dye back into the bag. So you could take this, spend 1 action, and this would go back into the bag. Now, why are we trying to do this? Because over the course of the game, more dice are going to be added through the dice tower and coming onto the board. And if another one were to get added here to the same spot, well, this is oil. It's now going to contaminate this animal. And if I don't push this dye back, if at the action cleanup step of my turn, there is oil, which is this dye, and there is a contaminated animal, well, this animal is going to go to the sick bay, and as we showed earlier, that's possibly getting towards one of the conditions to lose the game. Also, one of the other lose conditions are the spillouts, and I showed you that 3 dice in the same column like this is one of those, so sometimes you might want to push a die back in order to avoid having those. You cannot rescue this animal until you either push this die back first or by removing the die from the game, which will be the next action I teach you. So as we mentioned, you can spend 1 action point to push this back, but this is still contaminated. If you wanted to rescue a contaminated marine animal, it costs 2 action points. And so you would take this contaminated animal and you would rescue it. And so in this case, it would go just like that. Now keep in mind, when we rescued this, there was no die there. If there was a die here and it was a contaminated animal, you cannot rescue this animal until you push this die back into the bag first. Speaking of rescuing contaminated animals, it's one of the win conditions. If you save 3 contaminated marine animals, well, you're going to get one of your 3 victory conditions completed. So we had talked about pushing this die back in the bag, but there is a way you can remove that die from the game, but it costs the most, 3 action points. And when you do this, you will place it in the removed oil section closest to the boat. It was 3 action points regardless of the die value. That just happened to have been a 3. Now we're also going to talk about what happens when you remove up to 3 a little bit later. Now, you only have 4 action points on your turn, even though I just showed you all of the different actions available. Now, there are ways to get extra actions. Now, you can spend 1 or 2 extra action points on your turn, but you have to make sure that there's some dice in the bag. You'll just take it out. Let's say you want to take an extra action point, you'd take a die out. If you want to take 2 extra action points, you'd take 2 dice out. And you just place the dice here, it doesn't matter where it is. We'll tell you what you do with these later, but that's just to show you that you've taken an extra action this turn. It's gonna hurt you in the next round. We'll talk about that later. Now that you know the actions, let's take a step back and talk about the strategy of the game. You're constantly scanning for lose conditions or emerging threats, and your turn is largely correcting them or lessening their likelihood. The game feels less like building toward your win, but avoiding your loss constantly. Now, after you've taken all of your action points, all 4 of them, you're going to move to your action phase cleanup. But before we get there, because we're going to remove certain things, I want to go over some of those other finer points that I skipped over because now you know how all the actions work. When you're rescuing animals, I told you that you're trying to get all of them in a row. And you can see that maybe right here we just finished one of these. We placed one of these animals to finish this row. You can see that there's an orange cube here. Now you take your orange cube and you place it on one of these resource cards. Remember, these are the ones that player selected at the beginning of the game. For example, you could place it here, and this says, hey, remove an oil dye in your sector from the board. Now, once this is sort of filled up like this, you can use it immediately, but you can wait till the right time to use it as well. However, when you do use this and you activate this, you discard the cube and the card from the game, and that resource deck that you basically got dealt the card from at the beginning of the game, you'll draw the top card of that and you'll flip it up and you'll replace it like that. Now you can have multiple cards have cubes on them at once, but each card can only have one of the two abilities used. So this one can use this one because it's here, but you could not use this. If you were starting to use this, get this ready to be used, you would not be able to use this. And on the ones that have multiples, they have to be completely full with both cubes in order to trigger them. And as you notice earlier in the game, we set up the extra specialists off to the side of the board because some of these cards will allow you to bring those into the game. Now another way to get one of those cubes and do the same thing is every set of 3 dice that you have removed from the board and remove that oil, same type of thing, and you'll note that from the cubes here, they look the same as the ones on the left side of the rescued marine life section of the board. Now after you've taken all of your action points and used those up, we go to the action phase cleanup section. Now there is one step I'm going to come back to here later, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the things you do is if there is a contaminated animal and there's an oil dye in there, this one goes to the sick bay for that animal, as mentioned previously. This is also the step when you will place the cubes on any win conditions. Earlier we talked about saving 3 contaminated marine animals, and I showed putting this here. This is the step when this happens. Then, after you've done the action phase cleanup, you look at the win-lose conditions check. And at the end of your turn, if we had finished all of these and there's no losing conditions on the board, we will have won the game. You also would have won if the bag is completely empty and there's no losing conditions on the board. And remember, you'd also check for the lose conditions, and there's 3 of those. One of them is, as I showed you earlier, the sick bay holds at least one of the 6 different marine animal types contaminated by oil, or the sick bay holds at least 3 of the single type of marine animal contaminated by oil, or the board contains 6 or more of those spillouts, where the spillout is a column of 3 oil dice filling a complete sector. So remember, in summary, a player is going through the spill phase, action phase cleanup, and win-lose conditions check. We skipped over the spill phase at the beginning. Let's go over it now. This is what typically happens on every turn after the first turn of the game. The active player is going to draw a certain amount of dice from the bag, and that number is where this marker is. We're just starting at 3, but as it goes, it's going to be more and more. We'll talk about how this increases in just a moment. So they'll take those 3 dice, and they'll put them through the dice tower, keeping in mind that one of those dice, or even more than one, might be one of the blue weather dice. For the ones that are the normal black dice, you will continue to place them as I showed you at the beginning of this video, putting them in the earliest sector, closest sector to the dice tower, and pushing dice down as needed. Now towards the end of the game, you might not have quite enough dice from the bag to do the full drop. If that's the case, draw the rest from the removed oil section of the bag, because this is going to be the last round of the game. Also, you'll be placing any of the dice from the extra action pool, meaning the player just before you took some extra action points. These also get dropped into the dice tower and placed on the board. Now, as I mentioned previously, as dice come down here, they're going to push the other dice down. Anytime there's dice in all 3 spots of this column, we have a spill out. And remember, having 6 or more spillouts on the board at the end of your turn during the win-loss check step, you'd lose the game. And you'd move this 1 for the spillout. Now this is telling you how many dice you'll pull from the bag at the beginning of your turn in the spillout phase, and it's going to increase as the game goes on. Now keep in mind, one of the actions was to push back a die back in the bag. Now if you do that, it's removed this spillout, which means you're not going to hit possibly that 6 spillout end condition at the end of the round to possibly lose, but it does not push this back. Which means if another die comes in here, and there's a spill out here again, it will push this forward as normal. Now let's say you had a spill out and another 5 were to come out in this quadrant and go here. Well, there's no room for it, so it goes clockwise to the next open sector like this. If this was full, it would keep going clockwise till it found the first open sector, and keeping in mind if the die goes onto an animal, it will contaminate it. Now for example, if this was full and had to go here, it would come here and it would contaminate this animal. However, if this animal had already been contaminated earlier and this die came out, it would push to this, it would come here, and if the die lands on a contaminated animal, this goes to the sick bay. Notice when removing or pushing back a die, you take the die in the outer ring of the board closest to the players. This makes it easier to see how many spillouts there are since you can quickly scan the outer ring of the board. Now, I mentioned earlier that some of the dice in the bag are blue weather dice. When they get rolled, you will use this to enact a weather effect. Now, you do not replace this with a black one. You simply just take the blue die, you remove that blue die from the game, and you'll read out the effect of whatever that die was, depending on the die rule. Now, all of these are also listed right on the specialist board, and you'll see the die number as well. And every player is going to place one of their orange cubes here that they started with right on that number. And for example, this one says no specialist abilities may be used. Now, I'm not going to go over all these abilities because they're clear and that you just do what they say, follow the weather effects on the board. Now that's the end of the spill phase, but keep in mind you want to check for possible losing conditions, like maybe there's too many spillouts on the board, 6 or more, and this active player needs to remedy some of those in order to not lose at the end of their turn. So earlier we went over the action phase cleanup, which is done after you've taken all your 4 action points. And before, we hadn't yet gotten to the weather, which is another layer of complexity. So on your action phase cleanup, the first thing you'll do is remove all cubes from the weather effects, which means if the weather dice had come out on other players' turn, you might have more than one there, but you always just remove them at the end of your turn in the action phase cleanup. Now on to special abilities, all of the specialists have an ability, and they're all self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go over them, except this one has a little bit of information I need to add to this, is that once per turn you can push back an oil die for free, moving onto its sector. Now normally you cannot move, you can move up to 2 usually, but you can move and you can't do actions in between your moves. But this is not an action, so theoretically you can move, and as you're moving, you can push back an oil die for free. It does not count as an extra action, and you can do it with this ability. The spill is intended to be a difficult game to win, but it can be made easier by ignoring the spill out track and just throwing 3 dice in the spill phase throughout the entire game. But obviously, it can be more difficult by choosing a harder spill out track. You can also make it more difficult by having a harsh weather rule, meaning that if you had a 3 weather die, which means your ship moves 1 less, and another blue 3 weather die comes out before it's, the end of your turn, because they clear at the end of your turn, these would stack, meaning you can't move at all now. And this works for other ones as well, meaning it costs 1 and more action point to rescue an animal, but now it could cost +1 or +2, for example. Well, I hope this helps you dive right into the spill quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you'd like to see all the final art and components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me in the description of this video. Now, that's going to take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that Smirk and Dagger would love your support. Now, if you have other further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them, because not only will I be notified, but so will Smirk and Dagger Games.